The agenda for today, Access Policy Manager, just like I mentioned yesterday. That's one of the modules that we can use on Big IP. So of course, we have other modules for different features like web application firewall, like DNS, like AFM, so layer 3, layer 4 firewall, or DDoS protection, layer 3 or 4, like SSO orchestrator that orchestrates your entire environment according to the encryption, what should be encrypted, decrypted, what should not, and so on. So in this case, today we are going to focus on Access Policy Manager. What is Access Policy Manager? This is the module that allows you to manage the access actually based on identity, just like they say here. Okay, so manage the user access based on identity. So you can have some, I don't know, employees, maybe partners, maybe your customers, maybe you want to publish your application specific to your administrators and you want to authenticate and authorize your administrators for some critical resources in your environment. It really doesn't matter. So you can use that APM module to create some rules, to create some policies. Some of them will be very simple. Some of them can be actually very complicated to control the access to your resources. Okay, so your resource can be different things actually. Your resource can be web application. Your resource can be maybe some VDI desktop. Okay, so you want to get a remote access to your desktop. Maybe that will be anything else if you want to achieve some SSL VPN communication to your environment. So actually, you're opening SSL VPN tunnel into your environment, and if something is not working with HTTP protocol, or so you are using any kind of applications, any kind of resources, you can get access to this as well. And of course, this can provide many different ways of authenticating the user and authorizing the user. It can integrate with plenty of different solutions, and you can use single sign-on, for example. That's one of the features that you can use to simplify the access to your application, because that's one of the first ideas which you can have in your head when starting to play with Access Policy Manager. How to simplify the access to my applications, because very often you have, I don't know, not one or two applications that you want to publish. Even if you have your employees and they are accessing your applications inside an environment, you don't have one or two applications. Very often you have plenty of those. So you will need to simplify the access to your resources, and we want to build a solution that will allow you from one place, or maybe just a few places, access your applications based on different contexts or whatever. So it scales up very, very easily, okay, depending on how many traffic you want to pass through the box or how many clients you want to authenticate on your box. You can use virtual machines or hardware devices. It really scales up to millions of users. So on single device. So in this case, absolutely, you can use it in almost every environment. You will centralize the single sign-on processes for your application. So the ease of access for your users is very important. So if someone is authenticating to one application, but uses 10 different applications, why do I need to log in with the same credentials each time I want to go to every of those applications? That's wasting users' energy, yeah? So in this case, you can simplify it using single sign-on from the client side. So if the user authenticates to one of those applications, the user will be automatically authorized or authenticated, sorry, for different applications. And actually, most of the configuration, okay, maybe not entire configuration for Access Policy Manager, but huge part of the configuration will be created with something that is called Visual Policy Editor. So you're using Visual Policy Editor like this one. So entire logic for your web access or resource access, authenticating the user, authorizing the user, giving specific permissions, and so on, can be configured with this, actually the policy that is built out of different blocks or boxes, right? So this is really simple policy, or can be simpler. But from the other hand, you can build a very complicated logic with this. And it's clear how to use it, okay? So the traffic is passing, entire logic is passing from the left to the right. And then you know what happens exactly. At which block, for example, the user came, I don't know, didn't authenticate from my Active Directory. So there was a failure here, and we went this path. Okay, so the user was denied, for example, because we couldn't authenticate the user. I don't know, wrong credentials or whatever it is. Okay, so many different ways of using Access Policy Manager as identity and access management solution. So giving the simple web access, so secured web access. This is the first lab that we are going to do. Give the access to or integrate with some mobile app management. You can actually create SSL VPN tunnels. This is something that I will just say a few words about that, but we are not going to configure it during our labs. But if you need that, I can show you how it works. F5 has its own a client, VPN client, that can be used to connect to your networks, right, to your subnets. But of course, there are plenty of different ways of giving access to different applications, and also federation. So I'm not sure we will be able to cover that part today. I hope that at the end I will be able to talk about SAML or OAuth. It means that you can authenticate those users or authorize those users using something called modern authentication protocols like SAML, security assertion markup language, or OpenID with OAuth with OpenID. Actually, two different cloud applications. If you want to integrate with some partners, this is something that is used more and more often. And Big IP with APM can take part of this. So yeah, identity our proxy. So you remember from yesterday, we are proxy, right? So we are proxying the traffic. We can do a lot of different things according to the verification of user identity. We can integrate with some local directory services, for example. We can integrate with some third-party services, cloud services, so we can give access to cloud resources even after we authenticate the user on this box. Okay, so this is very common situation where Big IP works as something called identity management solution. And in addition to that, we can put, for example, some kind of multi-factor authentication, integrating out our Big IP with actually almost everything. Fast secure remote access, we are talking about the full tunnel VPNs, SSL VPNs, so I'm skipping that. The most common situation that we are using with APM is actually add some secure authentication and single sign-on possibilities into normal standard applications. Okay, so if we are afraid of publishing web application because we are not sure that this authentication implementation within the application itself is secure enough, so we can put that and give that possibility to authenticate users on Big IP, on Access Policy Manager, and then do single sign-on, because I don't want to cause a situation that the user will have to authenticate twice. First authentication on Big IP and second time on the backend application. So we are doing some single sign-on configuration for that. And that's the purely easiest configuration that we can achieve. And according to multi-factor authentication, so let's say our backend application that we don't want to publish into the internet without multi-factor authentication, and we want to add this kind of MFA. That's the easiest way of using APM as well. So we can integrate with, as I mentioned, almost everything, right? Which uses API or other options, some kind of one-time passwords with radius, some tokens, one-time tokens, and so on and so on. Whatever it is, SMSs, etc. We can use almost everything to integrate with MFA and then secure the access with additional factor when the user is authenticating to our application. So we call it enhanced web access management, because we put some security for specific application and integrating it with some external additional services like MFA, actually AA integration, and so on. Yep, very often F5 APM is used to simplify VDI access. So even if we are staying in front of some kind of competition like this, so F5 even for that can actually optimize the traffic for different VDI resources like remote desktops and so on and so on. So if we are talking about VMware View or Citrix, Xantis desktop and so on, we can optimize the traffic. So the user experience when using those virtual desktops is even better, right? So what we can achieve with APM as well, we can authenticate the traffic, so it's even more secure as well. So that's a simplified VDI. And actually, as I mentioned, everything will be configured, or most of the configuration will be done in this visual policy editor, right? So we have some starting point of our logic. We have some endings right here. And then everything what happens in between depends on our configuration. Okay, so what we are doing with this. So in this case, for example, I want to show the user some kind of login page, right? So I'm showing it to the client. Then I want to authenticate the user against my local Active Directory, ADAuth. If the authentication is successful, then maybe I want to take all or maybe some informations about that user. I'm talking about attributes from Active Directory, whatever it is. This can be, for example, telephone number, mobile phone number, which will be used here in this place to send a code generated here to achieve something called multi-factor authentication. Okay, so the user has authenticated with username, password, and then gets an SMS with some integrated SMS gateway with this code generated here, okay, to the mobile phone, which we gather here. And here we are going to verify that code that is put by the user. Simple, simple. So we achieve very simply sometimes. So with simple configuration, we can achieve sometimes very complicated or very interesting environments here. And for all of this, of course, what we have a lot of different reports, logs, everything can be logged, of course. So all of those sessions, if something goes wrong, we don't know what's happening, of course, we can review those sessions, why the user was not logged in, why the user was kicked off the application, and so on and so on. So many customized detailed reporting related to the user to the user access can be configured on our access policy manager. And that was the introduction to the APM. If you will have any questions, what else in theory could be used with this access policy manager, just put your questions into the chat, okay? And now I will go through some basic stuff related to the configuration for our for APM, and then we'll jump into the labs, first labs. So according to the labs, I hope that you still have access to the UDF environment. If any of you does not have access to the UDF, just let us know, okay? Hopefully, we will be able to manage the access for you. Hopefully, Alex is from F5 is still available. I'm not sure he's with us today. No, he's not, but hopefully he will be able to respond for emails. So just let us know in the chat that you don't have access. Maybe someone don't have access to this UDF environment, and then we'll try to fix those issues. But without this, unfortunately, we can't help you without the knowledge that something is wrong. So let's continue. Let's continue with Access Policy Manager. So when configuring Access Policy Manager, we are going to configure actually two different things, but we always talk about one. Okay, so we create the profile. You remember yesterday, 3 different topics were about profiles. And this is not something different. So huge configuration will be done by creating particular profile, which at the end will be assigned to the virtual server. And this is the goal of the first lab. So we will create some profile actually through the wizard, but you will see how it's being created and what's assigned to your virtual server. So we create a profile with particular settings. And for each of those profiles, one-to-one, there's one-to-one relationship with something called access policy. So access policy is something that you create in the GUI, okay? So this is your access policy telling how the user will be authenticated, and access profile, how the session actually will be maintained. So maximum users or timeout settings, some basic options for this will be configured here. And under access policy is actually entire logic, how the user will be authenticated and what we are going to use. And this, what you see here, this entire logic and so on, can be configured in different ways. Our first wizard, first lab, sorry, will use the wizard. So using the wizard here, so wizard device wizard here, wizards here, we are going to use one of those 3 options available here. So network access, so full tunnel VPN, portal access. So this is some kind of rewrite. I can show you how it works. However, we will configure that later during the second exercise, as far as I remember. And then you have this kind of web application access management for local traffic virtual servers. This will be our first lab, the easiest configuration that we can achieve with APM. Okay, so we are trying to authenticate users for simple tool that we have for the virtual server that we've created maybe yesterday, for example. Okay, so this is something that we can achieve. In most recent versions, guided configuration has appeared. So those wizards are pretty old school. And even if you will see the customization for your logon page, for your logout page, and so on, this is pretty old school. Of course, you can customize that completely, but with this, you can build a different kind of configuration related to user authentication, and many different other options appear here. So for example, if you want to use some SAML of OpenID integration with some external services, you can use this Federation tab. And then you configure, or maybe you want to integrate somehow with Microsoft, right? With Azure AD or whatever it is, maybe some kind of zero trust configuration. So one VIP, one point to authenticate to all of your applications. Doesn't matter from where your clients are coming into. So this is the goal of zero trust, right? Maybe you want to protect your API against some specific attacks, or maybe you want to authorize the traffic to your API. So this is of course as possible as well to do on Access Policy Manager, and a few other options that you have here. So in this case, it's also a wizard, but a little bit more modern, let's call it like this. A little bit advanced configuration can be achieved with this wizard, comparing it with the pretty old one, old school wizards that you are going to do in the first lab. Of course, we can switch into this one later on, but hopefully we'll have time for that today. So let's have an option and possibility to create those objects manually, because we have wizards, right? You have this guided configuration, but everything can be configured manually as well. And I will show you later on how this can be actually created step by step with every single option that you will create. So first, you can create, for example, an object that is representing your Active Directory or LDAP or whatever it is, like here, right? Maybe if you are trying to configure the full VPN tunnel, so what you need to do, you need to create something called lease pool, which means IP addresses will be which will be assigned to the client, which is connecting to the tunnel, SSL tunnel, right? So that will be the other object. All the configuration for that, maybe some kind of ACLs telling which traffic should be allowed, which traffic should be blocked. So you can achieve something like firewalling on Big IP, of course. So we can build your ACLs based on layer 3, layer 4, and layer 7 as well. So we can decide where exactly the user has access or not. Something called webtops, and we are going to cover webtops later on, which is something that is shown to the user after the user logs in to the application. Okay, so webtop can, let me try to, I have it on different slides, but for example, webtop can look like this. Okay, so I logged in and all my applications are here. Okay, so that's kind of webtop. So this is the landing page for the user. Yeah, and access profile, and then access policy with this one-to-one relationship, of course. And at the end, I will have some kind of connectivity profiles, how the communication between client and backend and F5, sorry, is handled, how we want to optimize that traffic, how we want to compress that traffic. So plenty of different options, plenty of different objects that should be assigned to the virtual server. If someone has enough experience to create this, that's fine. That's beautiful, okay? But if you see your APM for the first time, very often you want to start with those wizards. That's why we are starting with wizard, and then you will see what kind of objects are created for you, okay? So yeah, that's the relationship between those objects. So virtual server will be assigned with this access profile, and access profile with access policy, and actually within access policy will be everything else. So within access policy, you decide that there is some kind of configuration, resources, and ACLs, and so on and so on. This is something we are going to configure later on. Yeah, those are the components, access profiles, of course, settings. So some general settings according to user session, right? what's the timeout, access policy timeout, maximum concurrent users, and so on and so on. This is being set under the profile settings. Later on, I will show you that how it looks exactly. So yeah, this is still access profile, right? So some login or logout options, some domain cookies that you can configure, some languages you can actually customize your login page or webtops, those landing pages for different languages. So you can customize them here, right? Actually customize. You accept those languages and you recognize, for example, the language of the user browser, and you can show to the user specific version of your customized access policy depending on the language, of course. If you need, you can actually customize that manually. If there's no supported languages, unfortunately, there's no my language, Polish, and yours, but you can customize that manually. So every single status, every single sentence that is put into the, I don't know, logon page, logout page, some errors and so on, everything can be customized depending on the language itself. Okay, so yeah, access policy. So we've mentioned already about that. I want to skip that one here, that slide. So this is something we are going to configure later on. Okay, so entire access policy in this visual policy editor, I already talked about that. So you're going to configure it. Of course, at the beginning, when you will use this wizard, this will be created for you, but it doesn't mean that you can't modify that. Or of course, it doesn't mean that you can't create your own access policy and build very, very sophisticated logic here within this policy. Okay. Yep. Yeah, and AAA server will have next lab for that, but of course this AAA server, I mean the server that you want to authenticate with. So the database of your users can be actually anything from this. So Radius, LDAP, Active Directory, I don't know, whatever it is, right? Even local user DB, which in my opinion is not so good. It's better to use some some other external services like LDAP or Active Directory, and you can authenticate the users that are logging into the Access Policy Manager with those external services. And after authentication, you will give access to those to your resources specifically assigned. It really depends on what you want to achieve with this. Okay, so this is the example of configuring AAA server with Active Directory. So this can be a pool of your Active Directory servers. If in your environment there are, I don't know, 10 domain controllers, for example, then you can put their IP addresses here. If you have only one, you can put direct, for example, and this second method is being used in our case. So depending on the usage here, if you have a pool, and for example, you can monitor. Yesterday we were talking about health checks, right? So if one of those domain controllers is down, so you know that it's that this domain controller is down because you have some health checks configured, and you will not try to authenticate users against this domain controller, right? You put name and the password for those users, and that's it. Okay, so some specific settings, you're going to configure it in the lab and building it from scratch. So you have this starting point, right? You have a login page. So the user is displayed with, please log on with, bless you. Please log on with this with this username and password. Then I put my credentials, and those credentials will be sent into the Active Directory. Okay, and this Active Directory gives me the response. Okay, not okay. Okay, okay. After I successfully authenticate, I'm going further here to the logic of my policy. If there's a failure, so I didn't get any response from Active Directory, or maybe I put wrong credentials, I will be denied. So I go through this fallback branch. Okay, I can say that, I don't know, maybe I want to tell to the user that has put wrong credentials, so I can notify the user what was happening, and so on. Here in this case, I will be able to get some more information about the user, which groups the user belongs to, maybe some kind of attributes, other attributes that I can get from the backend server, from Active Directory, like phone number mentioned before, like other attributes that I can use later on in my logic of my policy, right? To give the user specific access to specific resources based on those attributes. So this is how I configure it. And at the end, of course, everything is being assigned, or this access profile is being assigned to the virtual server, depending on the configuration, of course, limiting the access to LTM pool, right? So normal standard access. I can create some SSL VPN tunnel. I can create some identity federation with OAuth and so on and so on, and everything I can do at the same time for different services. So for, I don't know, hundreds of virtual servers, I can use different access methods which are being added and configured within access policy manager. Okay, so this is how I create that entire logic. So when configuring this virtual server, this is something that we are going to configure in the first lab. Of course, exactly like yesterday, put a name. The type of virtual server will be standard virtual server. We put an IP address and port. By default, we should configure everything on port 443 because we should use SSL, right? So we are always talking about this port 443. We should assign HTTP profile because Access Policy Manager works by default at layer 7. So even if we talk about SSL VPN tunnel, full tunnel, we have to assign this HTTP profile to our virtual server. Then we should use SSL profile client because we need to encrypt the traffic. You can use default in our case, of course, but you can use something that we created yesterday. So if you played around those profiles we were using yesterday with custom certificates and keys, you can use that profile as well. And then at the end, finally, for the simplest configuration, what we need to apply is this access profile. Of course, sometimes for different types of access, we need some kind of rewrite profile, connectivity profile. Maybe we need to configure some kind of VDI profile. But in our case, the first lab will be actually only using this access profile, which create. Actually, everything will be created through the wizard in the first lab. Different types of access. So this is the full VPN tunnel. Okay. So this is the full VPN tunnel. So we get access to the corporate resources. Doesn't matter what it is. So this is a full tunnel. So it means that even if you, for example, want to give user access to non-web services, non-web resources, whatever it is, you can do that with full tunnel. You can have, so this will be the first part of the wizard that we are using. We are not going to do that today. Okay. The second option, which is portal access, this is using something similar to SSL tunnel. Okay. This is using reverse proxy techniques to rewrite local applications, okay, and publish them with different names publicly, okay? So even if you have your application poorly developed with some local links and so on, this will be rewritten when the traffic is being sent to the internet, okay? And this will look like this, okay? So all the links will be rewritten with using base64 encoding here. So this will be encoded internal name, and the user will get into externally to, for example, this kind of host name. So that's possible. Doesn't require, of course, anything. Everything happens on APM. APM automatically rewrites that content. And this is the second option. And the third option you're going to start with when doing a lab. So you have your application. Let's say you can do this for the application that we created yesterday with HTTPS and so on and so on, or you can create a new one in this lab, of course. So in this case, we have some virtual server and we want to protect that virtual server, that application that is in our pool, right? We want to protect that with using some kind of authentication, maybe multi-factor authentication or whatever it is, or simplify the access to that. So in this case, we are assigning this APM profile, access profile to the virtual server, and we add this authentication in front of this app. And this is something we are going to configure during the first lab, which is starting right now, okay? I don't think it should take us more than 30 minutes. I don't think it should take us more than 20 minutes, but yeah. The time is very expensive today. So let's do that as fast as we can. The rule is exactly like yesterday. If you finish, raise your hand in Teams, okay? So I know that you have finished and we can start with the next part of our presentation. So if you go to the lab guide, hopefully everybody has the lab guide. If not, I will put a link to it once again. So here you can log on to your SSH session to your big IP. Of course, what you can use, you can go into the web SSH here. So when trying to run your big IP and web shell, okay, then you're connected to your big IP through the web shell, and with shift insert, that's the way of inserting it here, shift insert, you will create the pool that will be needed for our lab and LTM virtual server with all the necessary configuration here. Okay, so after I put those two commands to my big IP, and if I go to my big IP and refresh my web servers here, intranet virtual, that's the one that was created for the purpose of this lab. And of course, this should be available with a specific pool. So when I go to my lab, where's my lab? .100, there should be something, okay? Refused. Let's try to see why. 10, 1, 10, 100. Yeah, refused because I want to connect to HTTPS. This is the Chrome. If I want to connect to HTTPS, it will not redirect me automatically. If not, it will do that. So proceed. And I should be see something in the backend. I'm not sure what. So when I go to the pool, let's try to see what's in the pool. So that's intranet pool. Yep, 32. Strange. Yeah, 32. It's weird. There should be probably something different because I don't know that IP address. So probably under 32, there's nothing. So in my opinion, that should be different IP address. Okay, you can try with 12 or 11, not 32, because that's the IP address that is probably not available on backend server. Let's try to ping it.
It is in the schematic. It's Windows 2 with the Lorax internet site 10.1.20.32.
Really?
Yeah.
Just a second.
I mean, it's at the beginning of the guide.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it. So it's on the Windows here, Lorax intranet site.
Yeah.
But the issue is that it's not available.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's offline, as you can see. Probably this can be offline because maybe this does not allow me to ping that service. This
is it started on the UDF?
Yep, it's under EDF. This is that one, probably Windows Server 2019. So this will be that virtual server. But let's try to troubleshoot that issue. Let's try to see it. Yeah, that's the SSL profile. Yeah, let's try to put automap here. See. Let's try it once again. Or maybe the issue is just like yesterday with the backend services on LAMP server. I will try to access that one. We'll see if it works fine.
That I think she saw there's no default pool selected on the VS.
Really? Just a second. Let's try to see it. Resources. Yeah, it's intranet pool in my case. That's fine. It should be created fine, but let me try to figure out what's the case. Yeah, let's try with this one. If this one doesn't work, don't care about that. We'll try to work with something different. Okay, so it really doesn't matter. We can use LAMP services. But let's try to check this locally. And 1.20.32. Yeah, and the other issue can be that there are some virtual hosts configured. And Yeah. Yes. Let's try to show you IIS configuration. I'm pretty sure there should be something. Yeah. Then 120.251. Let's try to figure it out. Yeah. So probably the IP address has changed. So please use this IP for those first lab here. So in this document for IPM, you have those two first commands that you should use to create the pool. Of course, you can create it with this and then modify the configuration with deleting specific backend server. But here, those commands, let me try to check that, and I will send that to you in the chat in just a second. Will be 251.251, and that will be it. So we can copy paste those commands from the chat. I may be mistaken, but I think I saw earlier that there is no default pool selected on your views. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was
Sorry,
the one
that was
I read.
the question. Yeah. The question from a few minutes ago. Sorry, but I can read those questions from the chat in the meantime, so that should be fine. So if someone has created that and the configuration is wrong already, right? So you go to the pool configuration, not iRules, pool configuration, and you have this intranet pool. What you need to do, you have to delete that pool member and create the new one with the IP address of 110.120.251 on port 80. So in this case, if you will try to reach this application once again, let's try to refresh that. That should be available. So that's the first part of our lab. Yeah, took us a little bit more than I expected. Copying and pasting those two commands. Everything is clear because we already have those VLabs and so on and so on. So everything is there actually because we are using this Lorax SSL client profile. So that should be fine. We get access to this. Yeah. Then we try to access the host name. Let's try to access the host name in this case. So they are asking us to use this host name. So right now there's no error for SSL communication. As you can see, the host name is configured as well from this, right? So hosts file on your Windows workstations. So there is the access to it. Later on, what we need to do is to create the access policy for it. So you go to wizards Then you configure the Active Directory configuration, specific like this, okay. You click further, okay, skip, and the access policy objects are created. So that's the goal of the first lab. And after that, when you try to connect to this application, you will be asked to provide a username and password. So this is something I'm going to configure as well, just to have the same configuration as you have. So we go to wizards. Nice wizards. Next. Okay. You're being asked to create a virtual server, okay, or use existing virtual server. Here you click next. So I can put a policy name, intranet profile, for example. Then I don't want to use SSO for now. I don't want to use something called client-side checks, okay. So click next. In our environment, we have Active Directory. So I will use Active Directory. If I had existing configuration, I can reuse that here, but we need to create a new one, Active Directory. Okay. So what we need to configure here is select the domain name. So that will be f5demo.com. Use a direct communication to our domain controller and put the IP address of that domain controller. 251. Then 122.51, okay? It allows queries without any permissions. So normally in real environments, you will have to use username and password. It will allow Active Directory query. Here we don't need that. So click next. And here the question to create a new virtual server or maybe use existing one. And we need to use this existing one. Take a look. We don't have any other virtual servers because only HTTPS virtual servers are allowed to use this feature. And maybe I want to create a redirect virtual server from HTTP to HTTPS. So for now, I didn't have one. And after going through this wizard, there will be something that redirects me from port 80 to port 443. So all the objects I wanted to have are created. Let's review them now. So first, this AAA server representing our Active Directory configuration is being configured here. So under access, authentication, and Active Directory. So those are the full details related to this configuration. And what else has been created here? When I go to profiles, policies, intranet profile, okay? So that's the profile itself, right? All the settings for our policy, those default languages that you have seen, etc. Some common settings here. Very often we don't change much of those default profiles, of those default settings here. Then I can go to access policy. So I can modify access policy from here, but when I go here on the list of all my profiles, I can edit that policy from here, and it opens in separate tab in our browser. So I can review the configuration for the policy that was created by this profile by this wizard. And it's very simple. Okay. So I have only login page and ADF. Okay, so on the login page, I need to put my username and password. So I'm being asked to put those credentials. So take a look when I go to this Lorax investments right now. I'm asked to put a login name and password. This is the customization that you use when creating your policy from the wizard. So this is the standard customization. So when I go once again to this access profile, this is a standard customization, pretty old school, right? And starting from version 14.1, as far as I remember, you can have a modern customization, or 15, version 15, sorry. You can have something called modern customization. So this the access page here, the login page, and all the customization behind that looks a little bit better, okay? But anyway, even this can be customized. We're not going to customize that completely, of course, but there are some ways of customizing your policy. Some quick start basic is very simple. General is it's very simple as well. But when you go to advanced customization, for example, you can modify everything here. So you can modify the access policy, logon page, for example, and entire HTML files can be customized here. What's there, how it's being shown here. Maybe you want to use some additional CSS or JavaScript or whatever it is. Yeah, huge possibility of customization. If you have a front-end developer experience, you can do anything here. So let's go back to this. Okay, so I have this login page. And then when I put my credentials here, username and password, I don't remember what's the username and password, sales user and password, sales user and password. Okay, I should see my application. Okay, so it means that according to this logic that I had, I were authenticated correctly by this Active Directory server that I configured in my configuration. So I was successfully authenticated by this Active Directory. And then I was sent through this branch, and I'm seeing this allow ending. So it means that I was passed to some kind of resources, and you can apply those resources through this, okay, so APM policy, or the resource, the simplest configuration possible can be a pool assigned to your virtual server. And this is the case here. So that will be this intranet virtual resources. And yep, that's the pool, right? That's why I can see this pool after logging into my application. So what happens here, my APM has authenticated me. So that's the user session visible here. Of course, I can enable logging on different levels, debug logging and emergency logging, whatever it is. So I can see what were happening during the login process. So user session and so on and so on. Yeah, successful ADF, right? Etc. I can see all the variables or session variables I can play with during that time. Okay, so this is the name of the user. Maybe I can do, and you will do some authorization. So you will get some information from Active Directory, and then you will see those user groups or whatever it is. And you can use that later on in the logic of your policy. Anyway, let's try to talk a little bit more about how to customize our policy, what can be configured there, what kind of different types of access we can use for our virtual servers, what kind of webtops or those landing pages we can create, how those resources to which we will gain access will be configured. So there are plenty of different things that we need to cover during this chapter. So even in the lab guide, this chapter is, I think that this is the longest one for today. So different method of accessing our resources. So for now, what we did was actually publishing our application to the internet. But not every application can be published in this way, because sometimes we will have some internal resources, internal links from our application, and so on and so on. So this application could be created only for local environment. And we want to publish that application without VPN, publish that application to the internet. So it's not so easy to do that with LTM without rewriting the payload and without actually reverse engineering the application. So what a F5 APM does with this portal access method, we'll try to do this reverse engineering. So we'll try to rewrite those URLs, links, and so on automatically for us. So we do the authentication and session management just like we did it for the first application in the first lab. But in addition to that, we are trying to do this rewrite of the payloads that are being sent from the backend server to the client. Okay. So yeah, that's provide the access actually to the application. So anything from single web page at the entire website actually, right? So it really depends how you want to actually give users access to this, because our resource, this portal access resource, can be a single web page or huge web service. Yeah. Again, different users can be given different permissions or different levels of access to specific resources that are being shared or published by our APM. And this portal access method uses something called reverse proxy. But anyway, the most important is that we are doing those rewrites, and you've seen that already. So there are some differences when we are trying to publish different resources. So we can actually, when talking about portal access, this is something in between this web application access and full tunnel, right? So it's none of them. Okay, we've created already this one, but we can have portal access and we can have this network access, with which we've covered before. When we talk about network access, yeah, we can say it's more secure, but it really depends on the configuration that we have. For sure, our portal access is more secure than this one, because in addition to the configuration that we have, or the application that we publish, we are doing this rewriting and we are actually hiding those local links and so on. So we do this rewrite function which obfuscate meaning encode those local links, not encrypt, encode those local links to the client. So again, the configuration of all those objects that we will need for this type of different access methods, this is really similar. So in this case, probably we will need some other methods. So for example, when we talk about VPN, we need this network access configuration, lease pools with those IP addresses that are assigned to the clients, ACLs, and so on. So we are not VPN when talking about portal access. So we don't need this. We don't need this network, right? We don't need this connectivity profile actually, right? Instead of having connectivity profile for virtual server, we will need rewrite profile in that case. So a little bit different methods. Keep in mind that if you want to build something like this landing page that you've seen, in this case, you can give users the options, okay? So you can, on one landing page, you can have VPN. So if you click on that, VPN will start. You can have this portal access, or you can have different types of access on one landing page for your particular user. So in this case, I don't want you to create everything manually, step by step. I will show you that in just a second, but I don't want you to create that manually. But we are going to use this second option. So this portal access setup wizard for, I'm not sure why it's remote web application setup. This should be portal, portal access setup wizard for something. I don't remember what's that. The screenshot is wrong. Yeah, and of course, the summary at the end. And finally, what we want to do in this chapter and with these labs that we are going to do, we want to create some kind of landing page. You've seen that before, okay? So after the user logs in to our logon page and passes the Active Directory authentication, I want to show all the applications to that user that are available for this particular user with different methods of accessing our resources. So network access, so full tunnel VPN, portal access, or whatever it is, okay? And those webtops has also different types, okay? So depending on what kind of access you want, you can have a single webtop with which allows you to only connect with full VPN, or maybe only portal access for single application. So after the user logs into the APM, I will actually show the user the application itself. There's no portal, okay? And full, so actually this can be a portal for the user with those applications that the user can select and connect to them. So that's the webtop. So for example, when I select this network, so this VPN, portal access, and full webtop can look more or less just a second like this. Okay, so after logging into the to the APM, the user will see all of those applications. So this can be portal access, this can be a pool, for example, this can be a full tunnel VPN, this can be a link to something in the internet, so just a simple link. This can be some federated application in the cloud, whatever it is. This can be some RDP communication, whatever, right? So the user can have all of those applications in one place. So yeah, this is pretty easy for users to use that and they get access to those different applications. Okay. So how do we create this full webtop? So we go to access. Then I mentioned that we need to create different different objects here, right? Not everything can be created in this visual policy editor. Usually we create those objects here. So here we are now under access webtops, webtop lists, and we create this list of webtop and the webtop itself. And then through visual policy editor, we are assigning those objects, just like this authentication Active Directory configuration, okay? So let's go that then further. So let's create this kind of webtop. Let's say it's network or full webtop, whatever. We say how it should look like, okay? So maybe I want to minimize the tray when the user accesses full VPN tunnel, for example. What should be shown in this webtop? A few different things here. Okay. You can customize that completely. So you've seen the customization. Yeah, under basic customization, some images and so on. So this is really simple, but this can be absolutely customized for all the colors and so on. Yeah, some customization. And to be able to show that to the user, you can't do this through pool assignment through virtual server. So in this case, these resources will be assigned through advanced resource assign agent in your policy, okay? So you need to add something to your policy here. Of course, in this wizard, this will be added automatically, but you can modify that. And I can encourage you to modify that, to play around that a little bit if someone wants to achieve different ways of giving the access to different resources. Just play around those options, what you have there. So in case you want to give resources for that user, you click that, you click plus, right? You add the agent, you select the agent of advanced resource assign, okay, or full resource assign, whatever, or resource assign, a few options there. And then you select with add delete what kind of resources you want to give to that user. So the portal access created before, the webtop, some links, maybe portal access, maybe full tunnel VPN like here, plenty of different applications that you assign from this. So when you click that, there are sections for that, what kind of resources you want to assign. So selecting one of them, resource that will be assigned to the policy, okay? And this can look like this. Of course, that will be the ending in your policy. This is pretty old one, so I forgot to modify that screenshot. So yeah, that's something that you create in Visual Policy Editor. You can do everything from scratch, and I will show you in just a second how to create all the policy without actually having this, without having the wizard. I will create entire policy from scratch. So if you build policies from scratch, you have nothing at the beginning. So you have just start and the deny ending and nothing else, nothing beside those two different agents. So we have to add some options for that. So you can create them like this. So let me try to create my policy, okay, right now. For specific application, I will apply that to one of my applications that I created. You will not be able, you won't be asked to do that in the lab, but just let me show you how to click that. I prefer to show you that here. Sorry, here than on my slides. Okay, so when I don't want to use wizards, I don't want to use guided configuration. I want to create my profile myself. Okay, so when I create this profile myself and I want to use this modern type of customization, so my profile is the name I will use here. I will select all. So this is the type of my profile. I can have a little bit less options or some predefined sections. I will select all, okay? And that's it. So the only thing I have to add right now is this English language. So I've finished this configuration. So after I've finished this configuration, what I have here is actually empty policy. So take a look. I have nothing here. Start, deny. So maybe not nothing, but not much. Okay. So what's the effect of that policy when I assign this to my virtual server? So let's go to my virtual server. I have created a specific virtual server prior to our configuration. So I will go to my application here. I will try to publish that application like that. Let's try to use that on port 443, for example. So just a light modification for that. And I will apply my profile. So access profile, I will do that manually, my profile. So let me try to go to my here. Okay. So right now I will try to run my application. Is there number 17? No. So let's try 10, 1, 10, 17. The WEA dot blab f5demo.com. Okay. So let's try to go to this up to HTTPS. Okay. Yeah. So what has happened? My policy looks like this. Where's my policy? Here. Let's try to refresh that. Not that one. Let me go to this policy. Okay, so I'm not expecting anything else. So I started my session and I denied the access. So I denied the access, as you can see here. So I will build my policy from scratch. So let's go and try to build a little bit more. So plus login page, I can customize that. I can put some different session variables. I don't know, whatever it is, right? So for example, post variable name, this is the username, but this can be, I don't know, whatever, right? And the session variable name, username, whatever, right? Let's try to use this one and this one. So when I save that, I can customize it completely. Okay, that login page can be customized. And what will happen right now? I have to apply that policy. Without applying that policy, nothing will change. Okay, so I will have to apply that policy and then try to access my application once again. So right now, boom, something happens. Okay, take a look under developer tools. I customized my username here. So when I go to network and I try to log on to my application, whatever, right, ASDF and so on. So when I try to log on to my policy, there's a post and the payload was username, whatever. That was the parameter name. And actually, if I went to my session here, active sessions, and view the session variables would be named exactly the same, username, whatever. Probably you will not modify that, but it's possible. But again, I don't have nothing here, right? So again, I was blocked. So this is how I will build my policy, step by step, building all of those options here. So authentication, I have idea, for example, right? So I want to authenticate my user against my Active Directory, against my domain controller. So I will select this created before object, right? Then after this, I want to give the user a chance to, where's advanced resources sign here, to have some resources, right? So of course, in your case, you will build using this wizard, some full webtop and so on and so on. I don't have any of them right now. I will have to go through this just like you. But for example, I can give the user a chance to go to this application. So let's update that. So I'm applying that through APM, but not through this. I will delete that pool from my virtual server. So let's click none. And the user should have, after I will allow that resource, should have access to that pool. Okay, so you can build it however you like. Okay, and after I will try to go there once again. So let's try to run new user session. What was the name of that user in this Active Directory? Oh, that was, no, what was that? Sales something. Sales user password. Okay, let's try that one. And what happens right now? Okay, something is wrong. So if something is wrong, I wasn't authenticated. I have, take a look. I had 3 chances to make mistake before my session will be removed. So I can check what happens there. When I go to my session, okay, I should have enabled debug log, and then I would have much more information about that. But probably I have copied paste wrong credentials. So let's try to use that one. That one should be fine right now, because this one worked fine before. For the purpose of this demo, I will kill that session. Of course, you can kill all the session however or whenever you like. And right now I will reopen new session. Okay, sales, user, right? And password. Ah, something is wrong. Is that sales user? Yeah, that one should be fine, but the issue is that I tried to show you. Let's try to modify that because I'm just taking the wrong credentials probably from my session. And that's why I have some issues. So I will have to verify what's happening there. Yeah, if I want to verify that, that's perfect for troubleshooting, for example. So what I can do if the user is not authenticating correctly, I can do, for example, some, I don't know, logging or message boxing for that user. So I don't need to look into the logs, but for example, I can show here what's the session variable. So I can display it. So percentage session logon last username from my logon page, if that was fine or not, or whatever. Let's try to install that, and we'll see what last one chance. Kill the session, and then we'll continue with the presentation, and you will be able to do that the same with the lab. But as you can see, this logon page is completely different than the one that is being used from the wizard. Sales user. Hope that's fine. Yeah, how it works, I have no idea why, but probably that was the modification here. So I would have to modify that ADAuth because the ADAuth is actually using the username here automatically, the default here. So I want to see this one right now. So what I want to do once again, now I will kill the session to make mistake. So when I go to my app, try to log on without anything, second chance, third chance. Yeah, doing something once again. Oh yeah, nothing. Yeah, that's the username that I put into this login page, right? So that's the message box which will be used for some troubleshooting and maybe notifications for our user. So let's continue with the presentation. What else do we have? This is something that you've seen already, so I will skip many of those options that we had here. According to those resources, the resource can be actually anything, okay? So this can be the VPN, the portal access you're going to configure in your lab, application tunnel, so per app VPN. This is something that you can configure in your APM. And something I created, the LTM pool as well. Okay, so let me try to skip that. We have full resource assign, as you can see this, right? So you're going to configure this advanced resource assign, and depending on who is the user, so inside of this box, you can create some expressions for which group, what kind of resources you want to assign. So in one box, you can actually do many of the different options according to, I don't know, sales group will get these applications. IT will get this application. Some kind of management will get these applications, and everything in one place can be done. So this is something you can configure in your lab as well. This is how it can look. Okay, so if the user is a member of this group, we'll see these applications on the webtop on the landing page. If the user has this, we'll see a little bit more, right? And we'll have access to more applications as well. So it really depends on what you want to achieve with this access policy. And of course, what else you can have, you can configure this remote desktop access. So remote desktop access will use some different options for that. So even if you have, for example, some VDIs, Big AP can do that for you. Can optimize the traffic for VDIs. So Citrix, RDP, VMware View, whatever it is, you configure your desktops. Okay, you say that this user has access to this desktop. So depending on the username, you can give users access to specific VDI desktops. So you can use some logic here, of course, without any problems. You can automatically log on users to that. So if the user has um, is a domain user, for example, you can use single sign-on option for that without any problem. So you can use this username source, password source to log on automatically into that computer, into that desktop. Okay, so this is how you add this. So you create that RDP configuration and then you add that under advanced resource assign in your policy. So first you create the object and then you assign that to that particular user. So we are going to talk about authentication or authorization of the users in more details here. So let's wait one more minute and then we'll continue. Okay, it's 3:30. So let's continue with a short presentation for this chapter. And then you will have the opportunity to configure everything here. So we've already created something called AAA server in our configuration in our APM. But for what and when this can be used? Of course, for now, we were using this Active Directory server, which we created for authentication, for user authentication. So we were checking the valid credentials of that user, which were put into the logon page. So we were checking those credentials against Active Directory server, and this Active Directory server has been replying as, is that okay or not? So that's the authentication part. But of course, very often we will need something called authorization. We will need to know a little bit more information about that user than only credentials, if they were okay or not, right? So we will need to get some information about that user from particular database. Let's call it like this, right? Because the user database, like, or user catalog, like Active Directory or LDAP or whatever it is, Radius. So in this case, we could use second option, which is called AD query, Active Directory query, to send a query to the Active Directory for some attributes about that user. Okay, some specific attributes or maybe all attributes. It really depends on the configuration that we need. And then in this case, we can achieve different kind of actually configuration after that. So in this case, we can get those attributes from that user, and we can build manually, for example, some branches, and depending on who the user is, what kind of attributes the user has, or maybe to which group that user belongs, we could assign different resources, as you can see here. So we can do it within the AD query itself. So when I would go to my policy, where is my remote desktop? Not that one, not that one. It's that one, okay. So when I go to my policy, after I authenticate the user, I would add this object for Active Directory query. So I will create the same server, the same Active Directory server I'm using for authentication. But in this case, for example, I would need to get the information about that user for this kind of attributes. I don't need most of them, probably, pager, whatever it is. So probably I will delete that. So the attributes that I don't need in my policy, I could delete them, of course. But most of the other attributes would be helpful to understand who the user is, for example, member of. So when I save that configuration, I could put a search filter here somehow. So when I save that configuration, okay, I can query the Active Directory for those values of that user. But in the branch rules here, the default configuration is user primary group is 100, so I don't need that one here. Probably I will need something different. So I could delete that one and create something else like AD query, maybe AD query past, right? Or AD query user is a member of something, okay? So that's the expression. So when I create something like this, I can create some different branch rules depending on who the user is, what group this user belongs to, right? So I can have some strange configuration here, maybe whatever it is here. Yeah, that doesn't make sense here, but I want to show you how this is built step by step. Those branches that you've seen in the in other presentation, like this one, right? And then assign specific resources here, different resources here, different resources, and so on. So this is what can be achieved. And of course, accounting. So the third A here. So when we talk about radius, for example, we can do accounting here. So for particular users, specific groups of those users, we can do accounting as well. So AA servers, you've already seen that. I was showing you those options that we can have. So Active Directory, LDAP, or Radius, those are the most commonly used AAA servers actually worldwide. So instead of having local database for the users or something, we can use some databases like those three. According to Radius, for example, this is very often used for multi-factor authentication. So we have some clients or this Radius server will talk to the cloud to to give us responses about the user if, I don't know, we have some push notifications on our mobile phones and so on, some applications configured. This is very often done through locally installed Radius server. Okay, Active Directory, you've already configured that, so I'm not going to cover all of those options that we have here. Of course, remember those passwords has to be configured properly. And of course, the logon page. This is how we build the policy. So I'm not going to complete this once again. I was showing you that directly from the console, from the big IP. And for example, this, you select the server, you put a search filter here, like where I should look for, right? And in addition to that, those required attributes, which for Active Directory, you have some default predefined list. For LDAP, you have to create them manually, for example. So you've already seen that. I'm not going to cover that once again. So we can build this kind of policy here. Employees, partners, or fallback, getting different resources, right? Oh, I'm skipping it. Sorry for that. Okay, so after you query those resources from the Active Directory about the user, and the user tries to log in, and you will verify the session variables for that user, you can get all of those informations about those variables in your session. So session ID last attribute. So those are the session attributes from Active Directory. What's the department? What's the display name, distinguished name, email, member of, very often used, right? Mobile, if you want to use this multi-factor authentication based on SMSs and so on. So all of those attributes can be there. Okay, so yeah, this is how we use this query, right? So we always ask Active Directory to get those values about that particular user. And of course, we can get a lot of different information, and based on those attributes, we can give the user different resources. Okay, so one of the users could get only 2 resources, someone else could get more resources, or even more, like here, right? Some examples here. So you can build that to get different resources, creating those branch rules from this AD query, or you can create that from advanced resource assign agent. So when creating it here, that will be just one box where you create all the logic for your access for your users. So depending on who the user is, that's the expression, the user will get this resources. So you can build at the end. So let's go, right? So you can create this kind of policy in just one object, which is advanced resource assign. So those users from those groups will get those resources. Those users will get those resources, and so on and so on. And this list is being checked from top to the bottom and is actually additive. So if some users are in this group, and this group, will get all the resources. This is how it works. So when you will build this kind of configuration, should be fine, okay? Okay, so let's continue with this. Different resources for different groups of the users. You will try to build something like this in the next lab. Okay, so this is the advanced resource assign build from scratch. Let me skip that. Okay, and at the end, of course, you will see something like this, depending on the branches. So administrators do something else. So of course, you can have it in one branch, or you can have it in separate branches like here. So maybe for administrators, to get those resources, you want to check something else. Maybe you would like to verify, I don't know, those users, using client-side checks, you want to verify, I don't know, if the antivirus is running or firewall is running or whatever it is. Maybe you want to do some kind of step-up authentication. So for a particular resource, you would like to get, you would like to require multi-factor authentication. For others, no. Depends on your logic. Let's spend some time with the presentation, and then we'll switch to the labs. So first topic, single sign-on. So when talking about single sign-on, we know that it's not an easy task. Okay, so we'll have a lot of different challenges to achieve single sign-on from the client perspective. So the user has one attempt to log on. Okay, so logs on to the application once and actually achieve the access to all of the applications behind something, right? Or at once to all of the application, the access is granted. So sometimes we will have to integrate a lot of different solutions together. And of course, when we have different applications to which we get access on different web servers, we would somehow have to integrate those services as well to work together. That if the session is open to first service, the session needs to be maintained when establishing the connection to the second and third and whatever service, right? So this is something that can be achieved with using F5's APM. And this can be dramatically simplified. Okay, so when having Access Policy Manager, we can use different types of protocols on the client side and on the server side. As you can see, we can achieve for different client authentication, we can have different single sign-on methods on the server side, or even we can authenticate the user once and give the access for that user for many of the applications that are behind our APM policy or our virtual servers, because it doesn't mean that it has to be one virtual server. This can be plenty of the virtual servers for which we have policy or the same policy, for example, applied. So it dramatically reduces the complexity of our environment from the user perspective. So the user logs in once, maybe they can use multi-factor authentication for that login process to be more secure, but we give those users access automatically to all the applications that he or she needs for their work, right? To gain access to some Salesforce applications and so on. So to some internal or external applications. So single sign-on APM can be done in a few different ways. And I will show you actually just a short example how it can look like with some forms or one of our applications that we will use in our example. So the mechanisms that can be used in that case could be NTLM, basic authentication, some forms, that can be Kerberos authentication, right? Or SAML, which we are going to cover in just a second. So many different options here. So when we create this single sign-on configuration, we need some more objects, of course. So we will create this SSO configuration like here. So now let me try to, I will show you that in just a second. So when we create the single sign-on configuration, we can add that single sign-on configuration to our profile. Actually, we are under profile configuration here, second tab, which is SSO. And then we select something that we created already, and then put something for to our policy for mapping some credentials here. Okay, I will show you this in just a second. And because we are authenticating the user to many services, so if someone has stolen credentials for one service, automatically gets access to all of them. So we would need to authenticate that user with some multi-factor. So of course, F5, as mentioned previously, can integrate with many, many different services that that are actually available worldwide. Like, I don't know, some duo security from Cisco, like I don't know, SMS authentication or whatever it is. You can select anything you want. So that will be the configuration for single sign-on. So how this can be achieved? Let me try to show you the interface. What are the options? What are the options? So single sign-on configuration, as I mentioned, few different options here. What I configured for my simple application here is a form-based authentication. So normally, without this configuration, I would have to log on twice. So first, I would need to log on to my Access Policy Manager, and then I would need to log on to my backend application. So I don't want to log on twice as a user, right? So I'm configuring the process of logging into the application behind BigIP, and the APM actually takes this process and logs on instead of me having to do that myself. Okay, so it's being done automatically. So without this single sign-on configuration, it would look like this. So let me try to disable that for now because I already configured it. So let me try to disable that for now and apply the policy just like we did for other configurations. And I will try to kill the session for that particular user. Probably, yeah. Anyway, it's a new session as well. Anyway, so let's try to log on as someone. This will be the sales user, and the password will be secret. Okay, I will explain what is that, okay, in just a second. But when I continue, there's no single sign-on. So I will have to log on to the application with, in this case, different username, different password, because my application is not, in this case, synchronized with user database from Active Directory. That's why I have to do a little bit more than only standard configuration. But I will explain that in the policy in just a second. Okay. So I logged out. So if I don't want to log on twice, I have to modify that configuration. So I have to re-enable that single sign-on configuration. So that's the forms single sign-on configuration. This can be Carreras. This can be some kind of OAuth bearer. This can be, I don't know, NTLM or whatever, right? Depending on the application, on the backend application that I have. Okay, so I enable that, but that's not everything. Within the application itself, within the policy itself, I have to map some credentials. And so my BigIP knows that what kind of names, username and password it needs to use to put that information into my backend application. So usually I will take the information from the logon page. Okay, so the username and password that the user puts into this application. Actually, not usually, almost always. Okay, so I'm mapping those credentials to specific session variables here for my policy. In this case, I'm doing some trick because my backend application does not use credentials from the user in Active Directory. Okay, so in this case, what I'm going to do is to modify those variables. So I'm using, instead of username, I will use the user hacker, and instead of password, I will use hacku. So it means I'm modifying actually the session variables. Okay, and those session variables will be displayed here, as you can see. Okay, so original values here, and the values that I'm using for my single sign-on are here. So this is my little trick. And then, of course, in advanced resource design, I have a pool of my application, one resource here. So in this case, what I want to achieve after I try to log onto my application, just a second, probably I will have to kill the session here or apply that. Yeah, install that policy, kill that session. And right now, APM should log me automatically into the application. So after I put this sales user and authenticate user and authenticate through through Active Directory, we'll put password here, login. Okay, access was denied. What was happened? Sales user password. I was testing it 5 minutes ago. Yeah, so that was the original values that actually should be sent to the application, but I modified them into this hacker hacku. So when I click continue, I automatically have logged into the application. So when I log out of the application, one more thing I have to do to automatically log out from APM itself is this. So when I go to profiles, I will have to show my APM that if I will see the logout URL here, it must end the session of the application, and at the same time, the session for APM should be closed, should be finished. So when I click logout, well, that should be again disabled. Probably I disabled that or did something wrong. So again, after logging out, of course, yeah, sorry for that. After first click, that should be something that has happened. So I should be logged out from APM session as well, just like here. So that's the goal of single sign-on. According to other options that we want to use to simplify access for specific users is federation, right? So federation, I mean, sorry, I will skip that. So federation, I mean using protocols like SAML and OAuth. I'm sure you have seen plenty of times a situation where you're trying to log on to a specific application, but from different service, like login with Facebook, login with Google, login with Microsoft, or whatever it is, right? So you can use different account on different service to authorize the access to specific application. And protocols that are used there are SAML or OAuth with OpenID very often. Here, let's talk about SAML a little bit. This is a security assertion markup language that can be used to federate the identity. So it means that, let's skip that here. So it means that I will have something called identity provider. So it means here I will have the database for my users, right? So identities. And service provider, so web application, which needs to actually be accessed by the user and somehow authenticated or authorized. So I'm the user, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the service, and this service will redirect me to authorize or authenticate in this case. So I'm authenticating on this service, and then I'm redirected back to my application with some information about me. Okay, so I'm bringing the information that I'm the user that should be authorized to those resources. Okay, so this is how more or less, very shortly, SAML or actually OAuth protocols can work. So this service does not need to store the database for those users. I can use those identity information from other trusted party. And for example, F5 as a big IP and with APM module can be both in this case. So we can be service provider or identity provider when we try to integrate with some options, with some services. Okay, sorry for that. We need to skip to the last part, which you're going to do during the labs. If you will have more questions related to the single sign-on or identity federation, just let me know. Let me know in the chat or let me know here through the microphone. And then I will describe both protocols with more details. But for now, the last lab that you're going to have is to test how actually F5 can be used to verify some information about the client workstation, client system. Okay, so this is called client and server-side checks. So what I can use, even in this policy, as you can see here, so what I can use, I can try to use both of this, okay? Endpoint security server side and endpoint security client side. When we talk about endpoint security server side, it means that we are using all the verification possible based on the traffic that is passing through the APM, okay? When we talk about the client side verification, we would need to install some agents on the client side. And then this agent is responsible to give me the information, more information about the client. If antivirus is installed, if firewall is installed and running, and with what is the version of the firewall, for example, if there are some Linux files on this system, and so on and so on. So for example, I can use this firewall, and if it's running on my client here, then probably I will get access to my application. If not, I can actually do something about that. I don't need necessarily to drop that connection, but maybe I can give less resources to that particular user. So let's try to this firewall. I have never been testing that here in this environment. So that's the first time I'm doing this here because the lab is a little bit different. So any platform, any vendor, any product ID, of course, I can select platform and I can select specific firewall vendor, okay? But I will do anything and the state should be enabled. I hope this firewall will be enabled on my Windows. And then I can save it. So before I will present the logon page to the client, to the user, I want to verify if the firewall is actually enabled and is running on my Windows workstation. So After I install my policy, let me try to kill the existing one. Okay, none. So in this case, when I try to reach this application, okay, new session. Yep, I need to have this agent installed on my system. Okay, so I will try to install this. You can install that together with the client, the VPN client, for example. This is just a component, operating system component, so it's not a huge client, and it does this component doesn't take much resources here. But we absolutely need that to verify something on the workstation. So let's try to install that. Yeah, trusted sites, and so on and so on. Okay, so after I try to access this, take a look, checking for security software. So it verifies with this agent if my firewall is running or not. It can take a while. Hopefully, it will finish pretty soon. Okay. So yes, my firewall is okay. So it's enabled. We can check it on my Windows, right? So when I verify that, firewall, check firewall status. So let's go there. I'm improvising a little bit here, so yeah, so it's enabled. That's why I was passed through this firewall check. But if I disable that, hopefully nothing wrong happened. Now when I kill my policy, or kill my session, let's try to do that. When I try once again, I should be blocked. Okay, I can trust it, of course. This should work. Waiting for endpoint inspection status, checking for security software. I hope that, yeah, it was enough to disable that. So as you can see, access was denied because I don't have firewall enabled. And you can do a lot of different things about that, right? This is just a firewall, but this could be verification of the antivirus. If the hard disk is encrypted, any files existing on your desktop, maybe Windows registry entry, specific entry, if you know that you have some standard configuration for all your computers across the network for your users, you can verify absolutely or almost everything here. So that's it, according to my presentation.